Welcome to Hort Science Online. I'm Andrew Wilson, the Technical Manager for ICL Professional Horticulture. So I'm going to talk about water-soluble fertilizers, which have been widely used, and the impact of the use of sustainable growing medias on their use. Now, when using water-solubles with the new sustainable growing medias, you'll find that they have a lower water holding capacity and a lower cation exchange capacity. Now, water-soluble fertilizers can provide 100% of the plant needs, as in terms of short-term crops like bedding plants, but more typically with perennials and nursery stock, they're used in combination with controlled release fertilizers such as Osmocote to provide the background feed. Now, when we're looking at the sustainable growing media, the important things to consider are that they have a lower water holding capacity and a lower cation exchange capacity. Now, to go into a little bit more detail, is what that means is the media holds less water at field capacity. So if you overwater the media, you'll tend to leach out a lot of nutrients. And also, because the cation exchange capacity, which is basically the amount of cations that the media can hold, is lower, it can hold on to less nutrients anyway. So with the sustainable growing media, it's really important to look at the crop and monitor the irrigation need and only water when it's required. This tends to involve shorter irrigation cycles but more frequently. We're all very used to working with peat-based growing media and we can tell when it's dry, but it is different with peat-reduced growing media and peat-free, and that's where we need to be picking up pots and really establishing when is the best time to water. And if we can do that, we will limit the amount of leaching from the crop and reduce the amount of fertilizer we need to put on. Something that can help is using a wetting agent such as H2Grow to spread the water more evenly through the pot. Now, when we talk about the lower cation exchange capacity of sustainable growing media, we're talking about the positively charged ions. So things like potassium, magnesium, calcium, ammonium, nitrogen, things like that. And they can be bound to the growing media. Now, the cation exchange capacity in peat-reduced products and peat-free is much lower than peat, and that's where the leaching can come in. But it's not just about cations. We also have to consider the negative ions such as nitrate nitrogen, which can be readily leached. And that's where matching the irrigation is really key, because lots of these nutrients will go into the irrigation water and potentially into the environment. Now, the most important thing when using water-soluble fertilizers is to look at the water quality, and it's key to take a water sample at least once a year to establish the quality of your water. And we're really looking not just at the pH, but also at the bicarbonate levels. Now, water with less than 100 milligrams of bicarbonate is soft water, and this has a low conductivity and is very low in calcium and magnesium. It needs to be supplemented, and typically you would use a soft water feed with enhanced levels of calcium and magnesium. Now, water with more than 150 milligrams of bicarbonate is called hard water. This has quite a high conductivity due to all the dissolved nutrients within it, typically calcium and magnesium. And we do special hard water feeds to slightly acidify these sort of waters and improve the availability of the nutrients and particularly trace elements. Now, it's important when you're using water-soluble fertilizers that you use them efficiently. And the first step is to make a stock solution. And typically you would dissolve 1 kilo of the fertilizer in 10 litres of water to make a stock solution. And then you would use a diluter such as a dosatron to apply it through a hose or the irrigation system. And you would set the diluter at the appropriate rate, which might be 1% or 1 in 100, or lower rates if you were using it more frequently. Now, one of the most efficient ways to apply water to plants is to use drip irrigation, and this can be precisely targeted within the pot, so you get very little leaching through the pot. And this can work well with the new sustainable growing medias. It's typically used with larger pots because the plants are more spaced. Now, drip irrigation can be precisely calibrated. We know how much this dripper set is supplying, whether it's 4 litres or 8 litres per minute, and then we can see there's four drippers coming off it. So within a large pot, there may be 2, 3 or 4 drippers within the pot, and they should be evenly spaced around the pot. And then to supply the water, you can see that there's very little wastage of water. It's going straight to the roots. In this situation, it's good to have a wetting agent within the media to ensure that the water spreads evenly around the pot. You don't want to put all your drippers in one place because you want the fertilizer to be available to all the root system. Now, overhead irrigation is one of the commonest forms of irrigation used for lots of crops. The problem with it is that it can be quite wasteful. And particularly if you've got fertiliser within the irrigation water, you're wasting a lot of fertiliser that can go into the environment. And as soon as you start to space pots out, you're wasting more and more water that can come off the canopy and run into the beds and maybe get into the environment. So these are things that we need to consider with overhead irrigation. The other thing to bear in mind is that the foliage is getting wet all the time, and you can have a higher likelihood of diseases, particularly fungal diseases, getting into the leaves and the roots. Now, if you are using overhead irrigation, it's really important, particularly with the new sustainable growing medias, that you maximise the efficiency of your water system. Look at the nozzles, ensure you've got the most up-to-date nozzles, that they've got less drift, and then also look at the water that falls on the ground. So put some pots down, collect the water, and just check that it's even. You haven't got too many double overlaps where certain areas are getting too much, or dry spots on edges. And if you do that, you're going to be more efficient with your nutrient use and water use, and you'll waste less fertiliser, and hopefully you get better plants. Now, sub-irrigation is a very efficient way of applying water to crops. There's two sorts really: capillary beds such as sand beds, which are widely used in nursery stock, particularly in glasshouses, and you can match the water supply to the crop need without putting water on the leaves and encouraging disease. Often within pot plants, sub-irrigation is used where the beds flood up and water the crops. And this is commonly used, for things like poinsettias and things like that. And within that sort of system, you can apply the nutrients, but also recycle the system. So it's like a closed loop, and you can monitor it and reduce the leaching and waste of fertiliser. So to get the most out of your crop when you're using water-soluble fertilisers, it's appropriate to use the correct analysis for the different growth phases that you'll encounter. So early on, you might use a universal green, which is a high nitrogen formula for fast growth, budding and rooting. You might then move on to a more balanced analysis, such as universal blue, which will give you nice steady growth without too much extension growth. And then as the crop starts to mature, or if it's a flowering crop, you would use a higher potassium formula, such as universal orange. Now, plants take most of their nutrients up through their roots, but there can be times when you want to apply a water-soluble fertiliser as a foliar feed. And this can be in times of deficiency or to perk plants up. So typical times, before you dispatch a plant, you might use some Peter's foliar feed just to give some extra nitrogen and trace elements to green up the plant and give it more vitality. You could have situations where maybe with high pH or waterlogged roots that you get iron deficiency. And then you might want to use Micromax iron just to green the plants up. These are sort of temporary measures, but it can bring the quality of the plant up, and then you can carry on with a normal water-soluble programme. Now, I think we can see with sustainable growing media the potential for water-soluble fertilisers to leach. So it's really important that we take all the factors into account and make sure that we apply them efficiently to minimise leaching into the environment. And water-solubles aren't necessarily the best option for all crops. So quite often a controlled release fertiliser such as Osmocote will give the best results, and the water-solubles will be used in more of a supplementary function to top up where extra growth is required or where there's been heavy rain or something. So we at ICL, we use our Angela Webb 3.0 programme. This is a web-based nutrient management programme which takes into account the water quality, the irrigation and the plant demand for each crop. And then we can give you a professional recommendation to get the best results from the plant in an efficient way. So ICL have a wide range of water-soluble fertilisers, including the Universal and Peters ranges, with hard and soft water options. Please speak to your local ICL Technical Area Sales Manager for more information on these products.